Iceman Chuck Liddell wanted to come out of retirement and return to the octagon. At 48 years young, it seemed like a far-fetched idea, but for Chuck, it's not.
For years, Chuck Liddell was the face of MMA's golden era, an unstoppable force with fists of iron and a feared knockout punch. But today, the legendary Iceman struggles with speech, memory, and movement, his once razor-sharp mind clouded by the very battles that made him famous. What happens to a fighter who faces decades of brutal knockouts and refuses to step away? Fans and experts alike watch in silence, fearing the worst behind his fading legacy. Early dominance and fighting style. Chuck Liddell arrived on the MMA scene in 1998 and quickly became a force unlike any other. Known as the Iceman, he wasn't just a fighter.
The Iceman, Chuck Liddell!
He was a spectacle, a street warrior with a signature shaved mohawk, tattoos, and a demeanor that told the world he was ready for war. His style was brutal and direct, favoring powerful strikes and a stance that invited chaos rather than evading it. While many fighters relied heavily on grappling, Chuck's focus on stand-up fighting set him apart, standing tall and swinging with fierce intent to finish fights early. His right hand wasn't just a punch, it was a weapon with devastating knockout power that commanded respect and fear across the UFC and beyond. Coupled with ironclad takedown defense and a chin that seemed unbreakable, he thrived on absorbing blows as much as dishing them out. For a long time, it seemed Chuck could take any punch and keep moving forward, embodying the relentless warrior spirit. His fights were spectacles that brought fans to their feet, not just for his wins, but for the raw intensity he brought into the cage. Throughout the early 2000s, Chuck ran through the division's best, claiming victories over legends like Vitor Belfort, Alistair Overeem, Kevin Randleman, and Renato Sobral. Each duel further etched his name into MMA history and propelled UFC's rise toward mainstream popularity. His performances weren't just fights, they were theatrical events, blending ferocity with precision that seemed almost mythic. The crowds didn't just watch. They roared as if witnessing an execution, captivated by an unmatched combination of toughness and skill. Yet, Chuck's dominance was as much about his image as his abilities. Positioned as the ultimate warrior, his look and attitude symbolized the emerging ethos of MMA: tough, merciless, and unyielding. There was no flashy showmanship, just raw, unfiltered combat. UFC leveraged this persona heavily, turning Liddell into a star who bridged the gap between underground sport and global entertainment. Promoted through television events like The Ultimate Fighter, Chuck became a household name by the mid-2000s. But the very attributes that made Chuck a legend sowed the seeds of future vulnerability. Fighting with such an aggressive, strike-oriented style meant taking repeated impacts to the head. The same iron chin that made him famous also masked a mounting risk, as thousands of blows accumulated over the years. In an era before awareness about brain injuries gained momentum, these risks remained largely unspoken. Fighters weren't warned that their greatest strength, the ability to absorb punishment, might one day betray them. Chuck's career was a relentless snowball of momentous victories and punishing wars that kept piling up with little consideration for long-term health. Countless training sessions, brutal knockouts absorbed and delivered, and a mindset that never accepted quitting created a ticking time bomb behind the scenes. There were no signs of slowing down during his peak, only the unstoppable march toward greater fights and higher stakes. The empire of the Iceman grew, but beneath the showmanship and trophies, damage quietly mounted. Still, for fans and promoters, Chuck was invincible, a symbol of grit and heart. When he captured the UFC light heavyweight title in 2005, it was like a coronation for a man who had redefined the sport. Pay-per-view numbers exploded, and his presence on Spike TV's The Ultimate Fighter cemented his celebrity status. This era marked the height of his powers and increased visibility. but it also represented the final years before subtle cracks started to show. This relentless dominance and the style that powered it would soon collide with the harsh realities of aging and accumulated trauma, leading to a turning point that stunned the MMA world. Knockout losses and declining performance. By 2007, the unshakable aura around Chuck Liddell began to fade, though at first it was almost imperceptible. His footwork slowed, and the reflexes that once let him see punches before they landed became noticeably duller. Though still fighting as the undisputed king of the UFC light heavyweight division, the edges were blurring. Even Chuck and the keenest observers recognized that his trademark sharpness had dulled. The icy precision was melting. The turning point came at UFC 71, a much-anticipated rematch with Quinton "Rampage" Jackson. Whereas the first encounter ended with Rampage overwhelming Chuck, many expected the Iceman to come back stronger. Instead, Chuck was knocked out cold in under 2 minutes by a brutal punch to the jaw. The crowd gasped not only at the loss, but at the sight of Chuck lying lifeless on his back, eyes blank. The myth had cracked in the harshest way possible. What followed only deepened the concerns. His next bout against Keith Jardine ended in a loss by decision, a slow and awkward fight where Chuck looked stiff and hesitant, no longer the dominant force fans had remembered. His reactions lagged behind, and his confidence waned. Each move seemed measured, lacking the instinctive explosiveness that once defined him. It was a stark contrast to the warrior who annihilated opponents years before. The close match against Wanderlei Silva provided temporary relief, but the team showed weaknesses throughout the match. Chuck delivered powerful punches, while he took dangerous hits from his opponent. The Iceman demonstrated his human weaknesses because he lost his previous invincible status. Rashad Evans knocked him out cold with a right hand at UFC 92, which became the key moment changing the course of the sport's story. The statue fell down in a mechanical fashion, which created a powerful visual representation of Chuck's lost power. The start of his career decline began with this knockout fight. Dana White, UFC president, and one of Chuck's biggest fans, publicly proved that the Iceman had finished his career. He maintained a personal relationship with her, but he recognized that she needed professional help. White gave Chuck an executive position with a high salary because he wanted to protect Chuck's health by retiring him from fighting. Chuck maintained his fighting determination throughout the entire process. Chuck fought his final match against Rich Franklin at UFC 115
between Chuck Liddell and the longtime ruler of the middleweight division, Rich Franklin.
Despite receiving multiple warnings from doctors and friends and showing clear physical deterioration. The match reached its expected conclusion when Chuck suffered a knockout loss that resulted in a violent head snap, which rendered him unconscious. The damage to the system remained evident. His 3 consecutive knockouts, followed by 4 losses through 5 matches, created serious concerns for both fans and experts. Chuck lost his fights in an especially disturbing manner because he collapsed with his head bent back and his eyes closed, and his body lost control. The officials stopped the fight because of injuries, but the fighter experienced a brain shutdown, which reached millions of viewers. His eyes showed silent trauma, which built up during every knockout he experienced. Fans started to voice their fears because they wanted to know if the Iceman would fight for the last time. Was it already too late? As the nation watched in growing concern, the inevitable decision was made: retirement for Chuck Liddell. The final UFC fights and forced retirement. Chuck announced his retirement after UFC 115, but his reasons were less about personal choice and more about external pressures. Dana White had pleaded, fans begged, and doctors advised him to stop. Chuck nodded, smiled, and said all the right things, but his heart remained clenched to the fight game. It was clear he was stepping away because everyone needed him to, not because he wanted to. To help ease the transition, Dana White appointed Chuck to a lucrative executive vice president role within the UFC's business development team. The idea was to keep him close, maintain his sense of purpose, and provide financial stability outside the cage. For some time, Chuck donned suits instead of gloves, appearing at press conferences and promotional events. It seemed he was finally making peace with a life beyond fighting. Yet peace rarely comes easily for a man forged by combat. Chuck stayed physically fit, continued training casually, and regularly hinted in interviews that the fire hadn't fully cooled. He confessed to still watching fight footage, analyzing openings, and imagining himself back inside the cage. The fighter's mind remained restless, caught between past glory and uncertain future. This restlessness was complicated by a major industry shift. In 2016, UFC was sold to new owners who cut many jobs, including Chuck's executive position. Suddenly disconnected from the organization he helped build, Chuck lost more than a job. He lost his daily purpose, income, and connection to the sport that shaped him. This abrupt change reopened old wounds. Almost immediately, whispers began spreading of a comeback. Fans were stunned and worried. Chuck was pushing 50 years old, hadn't fought in 8 years, and his last performances had ended in brutal knockouts. Yet Chuck insisted he felt great, was training hard, and wanted one last fight against longtime rival Tito Ortiz. No one around him thought it was a good idea. Doctors, coaches, fans, everyone pleaded with him not to step back into the cage. The UFC declined involvement, and the only promotion willing to sanction the bout was Oscar De La Hoya's fledgling Golden Boy MMA. The decision to fight was controversial, deeply divisive, and full of red flags. The next chapters would reveal just how deep the damage ran. The controversial comeback. Despite retirement and repeated warnings, Chuck Liddell's fighting spirit proved hard to extinguish. In 2018, nearly a decade after his last bout, he announced a shocking comeback to face longtime rival Tito Ortiz for a third time.
14 years after their first fight, they meet again for the third and final time.
At 48 years old and following a series of brutal knockout losses, many could only watch in disbelief. Fans, coaches, and medical experts were united in concern, fearing not a return to glory, but a painful finale. The fight was sanctioned not by the UFC, which had distanced itself from Chuck's return, but by Golden Boy MMA, Oscar De La Hoya's new promotion, stepping into combat sports. This in itself signaled how much resistance Chuck faced within his original organization. Dana White openly condemned the fight, criticizing those surrounding Chuck for enabling such a risky decision. Yet, the bout went ahead, the curtain rising on a scene filled with unease rather than excitement. Training footage leaked before the fight showed a man far removed from the Iceman of old. Chuck looked slow and stiff, his punches lumbering and disconnected. His footwork lacked the fluidity that once mesmerized crowds, and his head movement, all crucial for defense, was noticeably absent. Veterans and fans alike reacted with dread, fearing that Chuck's health might already be deeply compromised. Comments flooded social media, many calling it elder abuse rather than a comeback. His longtime coach, John Hackelman, refused to be part of the camp, voicing heartbreak and concern. He insisted Chuck had nothing more to prove and that his health should come first. Chuck, however, pushed on, brushing off criticism and claiming he was sharper and faster than ever. Despite these claims, his speech during promotional events was rambling, his answers disconnected. It was difficult to reconcile the confident words with the frail physical display. The fight night, which took place on November 24, 2018, created an atmosphere filled with tense anticipation. The two veterans who had once ruled the MMA sport now stood as lesser versions of their former greatness. Chuck's slow movements, which he displayed from the start of the match, showed his entire situation to the viewers. His punches did not hit hard enough while he kept his guard down, and his hand speed, which had been his strongest skill, had abandoned him. Tito Ortiz fought as a cautious fighter who had dropped his previous bad boy persona. The fighter took control of the fight after they completed their first initial strategic battle. Tito cornered Chuck and landed a clean right hand. Chuck failed to bring his hands up to defend himself. He fell unconscious after the punch struck him in the head during the first round. The audience reacted with gasps instead of cheers, which showed the deep sadness of that moment. Chuck suffered his fourth consecutive knockout defeat, which showed more alarming signs than his previous 3 losses. The final blow to my opponent was not delivered by a young lion, but by an old enemy who had also started to lose his strength. Chuck displayed his inability to protect himself, which resulted in a painful display of his multiple brain injuries that he acquired throughout his career. The loss felt less like a competition's end and more like a tragic farewell. The public and media responses to the situation came as an immediate and severe reaction. The fight received negative press coverage, which made it impossible to watch because the proceedings became disgusting and should not have taken place. White publicly condemned the event while he said that Chuck's supposed friends who let him enter the cage were not true friends. Social media became a platform for fans to express their sadness and frustration after they saw their idol turn into a broken person. The fight closed a painful chapter and opened the doors to wider questions about the toll of repeated trauma. Signs of brain trauma and cognitive decline. In the months and years following his final fight, the signs of Chuck Liddell's brain trauma became increasingly obvious. Fans noticed his speech growing slower and less coherent during interviews. Memory lapses became frequent, with Chuck repeating himself and struggling to follow complex questions. Video comparisons between his early days and recent appearances showed a stark decline, revealing a mind increasingly clouded by injury. The issues weren't just anecdotal. In 2021, allegations surfaced during a domestic incident that brought Chuck into court. While no charges were filed, court documents from his then-wife painted a bleak picture of his condition. She described manifestations consistent with chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, the degenerative brain disease caused by repeated head trauma. The documents spoke of memory problems, speech difficulties, and early dementia-like symptoms. These were alarming confirmations of what many had feared. CTE can only be definitively diagnosed after death, but Chuck's symptoms aligned with the condition's known progression. Medical experts noted his paranoia, mood swings, slowed cognition, and impaired memory. All classic signs affecting many athletes exposed to repetitive brain injury. With 7 confirmed knockouts and decades of intense fights and training sessions, Chuck's exposure to trauma was extensive and well beyond what the brain can safely endure. This diagnosis painted a larger picture about past mistakes in MMA and other contact sports, where early pioneers like Chuck fought under little knowledge of long-term risks. During the prime years of their careers, protocols and medical understanding about concussion and brain health were minimal at best. Many fighters were encouraged to tough it out, leaving a generation vulnerable to hidden, mounting damage. Fans who once celebrated Chuck's legendary chin began to see it in a different light. What once seemed invincible now looked more like a time bomb. A remarkable ability to absorb punishment, but at an extreme personal cost. The very trait that built Chuck's legacy carried a devastating price tag, one that only became clear years after the cheers faded. Chuck has chosen to stay quiet about the issue, although people have presented more proof and public anxiety about it. He has made brief appearances at UFC events and in interviews, yet he has never talked about his brain condition or potential CTE diagnosis. The Iceman character continues to show his happiness, but people now see his hidden weaknesses. The man who used to represent strength now represents the sport's most devastating outcomes. The current CTE discussion, which started with Chuck, has revealed the dangers that MMA pioneers face, according to recent research. Fighters like Gary Goodridge, Spencer Fisher, and Mark Kerr have publicly shared their struggles with memory loss and mobility issues while experiencing cognitive decline, which mirrors Chuck's symptoms. The first generation of MMA stars appears to be the first to face the full cost of the sport's early disregard for brain health.
But they were good. I mean, I actually got into it. I actually had to cut myself off. I'm like, I'm going to go check out another season.
Medical professionals and neurologists have increasingly spoken out, emphasizing the importance of fighter safety and long-term care. The organization states that CTE cannot be prevented entirely, yet they require better protocols and monitoring systems and education methods to protect current and future athletes. The urgent need for these reforms becomes clear through Chuck's case study. His journey is a somber reminder that behind every knockout highlight lies a fighter's mind and body, vulnerable and often broken. The role of fighter health in MMA. Chuck Liddell's decline has thrust the issue of fighter health and safety in mixed martial arts into the spotlight like never before. For years, the sport celebrated toughness and resilience, often at the expense of long-term well-being. Many fighters, especially pioneers like Chuck, competed in an era where medical protocols and injury awareness were minimal or non-existent. The emphasis was on endurance, keep fighting no matter the cost, a mindset that masked the accumulating danger beneath the surface. As evidence of brain injuries like CTE emerged from boxing, football, and now MMA, questions about prevention and care became unavoidable. MMA's governing bodies and promotions have had to grapple with how to balance fighter safety against the business pressures of entertainment and competition. Unlike some established sports, MMA was evolving rapidly, often outpacing the development of comprehensive health standards. This created a gap where fighters might return to the cage before fully recovering, risking irreversible damage. The UFC, as the sport's biggest promoter, has faced intense scrutiny regarding its responsibility toward fighter health. In Chuck's case, Dana White's public expression of concern and efforts to keep him retired initially seemed promising. Giving Chuck a high-paying executive role was intended to reduce his exposure to harm, a rare and visible gesture of care in a harsh industry. Yet when Chuck returned to fighting, the limits of these protections became painfully clear. Medical commissions also play a crucial role, setting standards for licensing fights and conducting pre-fight health screenings. However, the controversy around Chuck's last bouts revealed flaws and inconsistencies. Despite obvious signs of decline, he passed required medical tests, allowing him to fight when many believed he shouldn't. This highlights the ongoing challenge in accurately assessing brain trauma, especially when cognitive impairments can be subtle and progress slowly. The situation with Chuck has fueled calls for improved protocols, including longer suspensions after knockouts, more rigorous neurological screenings, and better education for fighters about the risks of cumulative head trauma. Experts advocate for ongoing monitoring of retired fighters, recognizing that many symptoms of brain injury only manifest years after careers end. The sport is at a crossroads, balancing growth and global popularity with ethical imperatives to protect athletes.
The main results were there was a shockingly high percentage of CTE amongst the brain donors.
The story of Chuck demonstrates how current definitions of toughness need to change through cultural transformation. People demonstrate true strength when they understand which moments require their withdrawal from situations, and when they need to acknowledge the hidden effects of their physical fights with others. The three groups of fans, media members, and promoters all participate in changing what people expect, because they now prefer to assess athletic performance through healthy, long-term success instead of continuous, unyielding determination. The future of MMA requires this difficult process, which people now realize as necessary. Behind the scenes, many fighters struggle with the pressure to compete despite injury, driven by financial need, legacy concerns, or personal identity. The solution to this systemic problem needs more than enforcement of rules, which should create a mental health support system that handles both physical health needs and psychological wellness requirements. Chuck's experience highlights the serious dangers that occur when MMA organizations and commissions start implementing their current safety measures. The path forward will demand courage, innovation, and compassion within an industry built on combat. Impact on Chuck's personal life. The effects of Chuck Liddell's brain trauma extend beyond the cage, deeply impacting his personal relationships and daily life. As cognitive and speech issues increased, those close to him noticed a growing distance, emotional, mental, and sometimes physical. His marriage, once a source of stability, reportedly collapsed under the strain of his health challenges and behavioral changes. The isolation that often accompanies such decline became a painful reality for a man who thrived in the spotlight. Friends and longtime coaches, who once stood beside him through every battle, gradually withdrew as Chuck's struggles mounted. His trainer, John Hackelman, openly expressed heartbreak over Chuck's decision to return to fighting and ultimately stepped away from their relationship. The shrinking of Chuck's support network revealed the harsh toll brain trauma can take on the social fabric around a fighter. Those who loved him were often left powerless, watching the man they knew unravel. The loss of his executive role at the UFC in 2016 was another blow, stripping away not just financial security, but a daily sense of purpose and belonging within the sports community. This sudden displacement coincided with whispers of returning to the cage, highlighting how intertwined Chuck's identity was with fighting. The transition from champion to retired athlete proved difficult, intensified by fading mental acuity and public scrutiny. Public appearances and interviews showcased a man struggling visibly with memory lapses, slowed speech, and confusion, further alienating him from fans and the MMA community that once celebrated his strength. Moments where Chuck would repeat sentences or lose track mid-conversation were no longer rare, sparking concern and sadness among viewers. This loss of cognitive sharpness reshaped the way people related to the former champion, from admiration to empathy tinged with grief. Court documents from 2021 established new evidence when Chuck's wife presented evidence that he showed symptoms of early-onset dementia or Alzheimer's disease. The legal claims revealed his health condition through which his personal battles became known to the public. The person who spent every day with him confirmed his health situation, which made people realize the need for urgent help he needed. Chuck developed a complex relationship with the UFC organization throughout his career. After Dana White treated him as family, the fighter became alienated from White when he returned to the sport after his health issues. White suggested in his subsequent remarks that Chuck maintained complete independence because he was an adult who controlled his life decisions. The MMA community responded to this situation because it raised questions about how organizations should protect their fighters and take responsibility for their well-being. Social media platforms and fan groups showed deep sorrow and remorse as they considered how their admired hero developed into a person with brain damage. People who participated in online discussions believed that they had let Chuck down because they supported his comebacks, while ignoring early warning signs. The GoFundMe campaigns that fans initiated to fund brain research in his name emerged as a way for fans to honor his personal sacrifices while generating awareness about their costs. Transitions linger like echoes, reminding us that beneath every champion's triumph lies a human story waiting to be heard. MMA's responsibility and future outlook. Chuck Liddell's tragic decline has forced the MMA community to face a crucial question. What responsibility do organizations owe to fighters who put their health on the line? For years, this sport celebrated warriors risking everything for greatness without fully grappling with the long-term consequences. Chuck's story embodies the urgent need for systemic change, particularly as more fighters show signs of brain injury long after their careers end. The future of MMA depends on addressing these vulnerabilities with care, transparency, and proactive measures. One of the greatest challenges MMA faces is balancing the sport's inherent violence with the ethical imperative to protect its athletes. Unlike team sports with established safety cultures, MMA evolved rapidly, and its medical infrastructure has often lagged behind. The visceral thrill of competition risks overshadowing medical concerns, and promoters face pressure to keep stars and revenues alive. Chuck's visible struggles highlight what happens when the health of a fighter is compromised for the sake of continuing the show. To move forward, the UFC and athletic commissions worldwide must adopt stricter, evidence-based protocols. This means implementing longer mandatory suspensions after knockouts, comprehensive neurological assessments before and after fights, and continuous monitoring once careers end. Medical staff should have greater authority to intervene when cognitive decline is suspected, removing decisions from fighters and promoters caught in conflicting interests. Prevention and early detection of brain trauma must become standard practice, not an afterthought.
In certain ways, experts say CTE resembles Alzheimer's, seen here on the right in a brain scan compared to a healthy brain.
Education also plays a key role. Fighters, coaches, and families need access to information about the risks of cumulative concussions and head trauma. Many early-era fighters fought without understanding these dangers, as was the case with Chuck. Today's generation deserves clear warnings and support systems that prioritize their lifelong health. Promoting a culture where retiring to preserve brain function is seen as courageous, not weak, would be a fundamental shift away from outdated toughness standards. Beyond prevention, there is the critical issue of care for retired fighters. Many, like Chuck, suffer cognitive decline, mood disorders, and physical disabilities caused by years of unprotected fighting. Comprehensive healthcare programs, including mental health support and financial assistance, should be developed with the involvement of promotions, unions, and healthcare providers. MMA's pioneers laid the foundation for the sport's global rise. Honoring them requires investing in their well-being long after the spotlight fades. The discussion about brain health has led to proposals that seek to change fighting regulations and competition formats in order to decrease brain injury risks. The MMA discipline needs safety improvements, which can be achieved through better protective equipment and referee training programs and new methods of competition assessment. The sport requires this complex dialogue because it needs to protect its athletes and fans who want to see a healthy future. The situation with Chuck Liddell has become a unifying force because it shows people that every highlight reel shows a person whose life gets changed forever. MMA requires its fans and promoters and regulators to judge their fighting heroes through criteria that exceed immediate entertainment value and pay-per-view revenue. The road to advancement demands that we confront essential realities which require us to make challenging decisions that will help fighters throughout their professional journeys. Chuck Liddell's journey is a solemn lesson on the hidden toll of fighting and the urgent need for change in MMA. His rise, fall, and ongoing struggles remind us that behind every punch is a person deserving of care and respect. If you found this story important, please like and subscribe for more deep dives into the real stories behind the sport.